The stepmother dragged her into the middle of the village square while 300 people were eating. She did not do it quietly. That was the point. She waited until the drums stopped, and every family in Inquantanan was watching, then pulled the girl into the open ground and let go of her so hard that she went down on one knee in the dust. Then she dropped a small basket in front of her. A child's basket, 2 handfuls of millet in the bottom, not a meal, the kind of thing you would throw to a chicken. "Take it," the stepmother said, loud enough for the whole square to hear. "It is more food than you deserve." The girl's name was Serwaa. She was 19. She had planted that field. She had weeded it and carried water to it through the dry weeks, and cut and threshed the grain that was sitting in baskets all around that square at that very moment, being eaten. Nobody said anything. 300 people. Not one of them. Serwaa picked up the basket, because it was that or nothing, and walked out of her own father's village, carrying it. That night she slept outside the gate with her back against the wall, because the gate is shut after dark, and a person outside it stays outside it. And in the morning, cold and hungry, with 2 handfuls of millet to her name, she gave all of it away. There was an old woman on the road, thin, gray, filthy from walking, so weak she had gone down in the grass and could not get up. A stranger. Serwaa had never seen her before in her life. So Serwaa made a fire, cooked the millet, all of it, every grain, and fed it to her. And when the old woman could speak again, she looked at this girl who had nothing and had given it away anyway, and said, "One day your kindness will feed more people than this basket ever could." Then she went on up the road, and she was gone. 10 weeks later, that same old woman walked back into Inquantanan, and the moment the elders saw her face, every one of them stood up. Stay with me to the end of this one. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe so you never miss a story, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The village of Inquantanan sat where 3 roads met. The name meant the crossroads, and that was exactly what it was. Traders going north with salt and coming back south with cola, rich land, rains that came when they were supposed to. Once a year, at the end of the harvest, Inquantanan held a festival that people walked 2 days to attend. If you were born there, you were lucky, and you knew it. Serwaa had been born there. She did not feel lucky. She was 19, with her mother's straight back and her father's quiet way of watching people before she spoke. Strong hands, hard across the palms. The hands of someone who had been working since she was small. And she lived in the best compound on the eastern side of the village. 3 rooms, a good roof, a wide yard, a granary. Her father had built it. His name was Niarko. He had been a grain farmer, and he was 7 years dead. Serwaa's mother died when she was 6. A man alone with a small child needs help. So 2 years later, Niarko married a widow from the north. A strong, capable, well-spoken woman named Konadu, who arrived with a son of her own named Bodu, and for 4 years it was fine. That is the part people forget. It was fine. Then Niarko took a fever in the wet season and was dead in 11 days. Because Konadu was clever, and Konadu could count. The land was Niarko, and under the custom of that place, it should have gone to Niarko's blood, which meant Serwaa, 12 years old, and unable to farm a hectare of it by herself. And Konadu knew, the way she knew her own name, that a girl with land is a girl who gets married off, and the land goes with her into somebody else's family. So she made a decision in the weeks after the funeral, and never once said it out loud. She would keep the land by keeping the girl, not by beating her. Konadu almost never beat her. Far too clever for that. A beaten child gets noticed and neighbors talk. She did something slower and much more effective. She made Serwaa necessary, and then made her invisible. By 14, Serwaa was doing the water. By 15, the cooking and washing and the yard. By 16, the field. By 19, all of it. She did the work is easy to say and hard to feel. It means up before light, every day, all year. 4 trips to the stream before most people had eaten, that field in the planting rains with mud past her ankles, and in the dry weeks carrying water gourd by gourd to keep the young plants alive, and at harvest cutting and threshing until her arms shook. It means she mended the granary roof herself, alone, at 18. because nobody else was going to, and Bodu was 22 and not a monster. That is the thing about him. He was simply the most comfortable young man in Inquantanan, and had never in his life had a reason to be anything else. He walked out to the field sometimes, looked at it, and came back. He talked about the palm wine trade he was going to start. He had been going to start it for 4 years, and Kanadu, this is the part that made it work, took the credit. She would stand at the edge of the field with the other women and say, "Ei, this year nearly finished me," and press her hand to her back. And they would laugh and tell her she worked too hard. She would carry yams to a funeral and say, "From my farm." And she was generous in public, in exactly the right amounts, at exactly the right moments. That is not an accident. That is a strategy. So Kanadu of Inquantanan had a reputation. Hard-working devote, widow who had raised another woman's child and kept a dead man's farm alive with her own 2 hands. Everybody believed it, because the only person who could have contradicted her was a quiet girl who never spoke, and nobody had ever thought to ask her anything. Now, the festival of the full barns came at the end of the harvest moon, and was the biggest thing that happened in Inquantanan all year. Drums, dancing, 3 days of it, families from 4 villages coming in. But at the center of it was something older and quieter that mattered more than any of the dancing. On the final evening, the keeper of the harvest traditions named one household one as the household that had best shown generosity that year, not the biggest farm. The most generous. That family led the procession the following harvest. Their name went into the elders' record, and their grandchildren would still say our house was named 50 years later. It was the highest honor the village had, and when this story begins, there were exactly 40 days left until the festival, and everyone in Inquantanan already knew who was going to win it. The harvest was bad that year. Nobody starved, but the rains came late and stopped early, and the grain came in thin, perhaps 2/3 of a normal year. Every family felt it. Kanadu felt it more than most, for a reason that had nothing to do with rain. For 3 years she had been selling grain forward, taking money from traders in advance against the coming harvest, and spending it on cloth, on Annie Roof, on her son's endless plans. It worked beautifully as long as the harvest covered it. This year, it did not. She was badly short, and in a month, traders were going to arrive at her gate, expecting grain that did not exist. Hold that, because it explains everything that follows. Kanadu was not simply cruel. Kanadu was frightened, and a frightened person who has spent 7 years building a reputation will do almost anything rather than watch it come apart. She needed the shortfall to be somebody's fault. Somebody who was not her. It started small. A remark to a neighbor about the girl going through the field carelessly at cutting time. A comment at the stream about grain going missing. She never made an accusation. She put the shape of one into the air and let other people finish it. And Serwaa, who had cut that field alone and knew exactly why it came in thin, said nothing. What was she going to say? My stepmother has been selling the harvest before it grows. Who was going to believe that, from her, it did not pass? It grew, and on the first night of the festival of the full barns, it broke. The first night is the feast night. Every household brings what it can. The food goes onto long tables under the trees, and the whole village eats together in the open. It is one of the most beautiful nights of the year. Konadu had brought a great deal of food. Everyone remarked on it. Serwaa had carried every basket of it into that square. 3 trips, and then stood at the edge of the light where she always stood. The drums stopped between songs. There was that loose, laughing silence you get in a crowd that is full and happy, and Kanadu stood up. Before we go on, she said, I must say something, because it is eating me. The square went quiet. Every face turned, and Serwaa, standing at the edge holding an empty basket, felt her stomach drop, because she knew that voice. That was the public voice. You have all seen my harvest this year. You have all seen it is thin. I have said nothing. I have carried it. She let that land. But I cannot carry it any longer, because it is not the rain. Someone said, Ei. There has been grain leaving my granary all season, handful by handful, basket by basket, and I have watched it and prayed about it and hoped I was wrong. And then she turned, in front of 300 people, and looked straight at Serwaa. I took her in, she said. I fed her from my own pot when her father died. 7 years. Her voice cracked, and here's the terrible part. The crack was real. She had told the story to herself so many times that she believed it. And she robs me. She robs the house that raised her, in a bad year, when there is nothing. Serwaa did not speak. She has said since that there was a sound in her ears like water and her mouth would not work. What she remembered was the faces. It was watching perhaps 40 people decide, in a single second, that it was probably true, and then look away. You will not sleep in my house tonight, Kanadu said, and she walked over, and she took Serwaa by the arm, and she dragged her out into the middle of the open ground and let go of her, so that she went down on one knee in the dust. Then Kanadu picked up a small basket from the nearest table, a child's basket, 2 handfuls of millet in the bottom, and dropped it in front of her. Take it, she said. It is more food than you deserve. There is a particular silence a crowd makes when it knows it is watching something wrong. It is not really silence. It is 300 people deciding, at the same moment, that this is not their business. An old woman near the drum started to stand and was pulled back down by her daughter. A man at the second table said, "Eh, Kanadu," and did not finish it. Nobody helped her. Serwaa got up, picked up the basket, and walked out past the tables, and the food and the faces, out of the eastern gate of her father's village. Nobody followed her. She sat down with her back against the outside of the wall, and stayed there all night, listening to the drums start up again inside, because they did start up again. After a while, the way they always do, she did not cry until nearly morning, and she was quiet about it, out of a habit she had learned at 12. At first light, she started walking north along the Trader's Road. She was not going anywhere. She just did not want to be at that gate when people came out. And about a mile up the road, in the long wet grass at the edge of the path, she found the old woman. She thought it was a bundle of cloth tenet mobid. It was an old woman, very old, very thin, gray, her cloth filthy from the road, a walking stick fallen just out of reach. Her lips were cracked white. She had the look of someone who had been walking for days on nothing. Serwaa knelt down. "Mother, can you hear me?" The old woman's eyes opened. Very dark, very steady. They took a moment to find her. "I have been 3 days without food," she said, and Serwaa sat back on her heels and looked at the basket in her hand. Be clear about this moment, because it is the whole story. Serwaa was not a saint. She was a 19-year-old girl thrown out of her own house in front of the whole village 9 hours earlier, who had eaten nothing since the previous morning, who had no home and no plan and nobody holding every single thing she owned in a child's basket. She thought about it. She has always admitted that. She sat in the wet grass and thought about it a long moment. Then she found dry sticks and made a fire and fetched water and cooked the millet, all of it. Every grain. Not half, not most, and fed it to the old woman a little at a time, the way you have to when someone has not eaten for days. It took most of the morning. Serwaa sat with her afterwards, while she slept in the shade, and when the old woman woke and was strong enough to sit up, she looked at this girl for a long time. "What is your name?" "My daughter, Serwaa." "And where is your family, sir?" "I have none, mother." The old woman looked at her a while longer. Then she reached out and took Serwaa's hand, her hard, cracked, working hand, and held it. "One day," she said, "your kindness will feed more people than this basket ever could." Serwaa smiled because it was a kind thing to say. She helped her up, put the walking stick into her hand, and watched her go off up the north road, slow but steady, until she went round the bend and out of sight. Then Serwaa sat down beside the dead fire and the empty basket, with nothing at all left in the world, and wondered what she was going to do now. If you are already angry, if you have already decided that woman must answer for what she did in that square, then do me one small kindness before we go on. Tap the like button, and tell me in the comments the name of the town or country where you are watching from. And subscribe to our family, because in 10 weeks, that old woman is going to walk back into Enkwantanan, and when she does, every elder in that village is going to rise to their feet, and what she says then, nobody is ready for. She did not leave. Everyone assumed she would. That is what a shamed girl does. she goes to the city, or to a distant relative, and the village never hears of her again. And in 2 years, people have trouble remembering her face, Serwaa Stiget. And when people asked her afterwards, why, she always gave the same answer. And it was not a noble one. Where would I have gone? I did not know anybody. So she did the only thing she could think of. There was an old cocoa shed at the forest edge for posts, half a roof, no walls, abandoned for years. She cleared it out, cut palm fronds, and closed in 2 sides, and built a hearth of 3 stones. And she began, very slowly, to live. It was hard, and I will not pretend otherwise. The first 2 weeks she was hungry almost all the time, eating what the forest gave snails after rain. Wild yam, a fruit nobody bothers with unless they have to. She got sick in the 3rd week and lay on the ground alone for 2 days with a fever and thought she might die there, and told nobody, because there was nobody to tell. But she was her father's daughter, and Nyarko had taught her things. He had taught her the forest, which leaf brings a fever down, which bark, boiled, settles a stomach, which root is for a cough, and which will make a child worse. Farmer's knowledge, passed down, nothing magical about it, and he had taught her to weave grain baskets, winnowing trays, the tight-woven kind that hold seed. Skilled work. There were only 3 people left in Inquantunnen who could do it properly, so Serwaa worked. She gathered herbs and dried them on the shed roof. She cut cane and wove, and because the north road ran right past her shed, people passed constantly, and she began, in a small way, to be useful. It started with a child. A boy of about 7, walking with his mother, went down on the path with a fever so sudden the woman was frantic. Serwaa came out, said bring him into the shade, boiled the leaf, and sat with him 3 hours until it broke. The woman had no money. She gave Serwaa a piece of dried fish, and cried and asked her name. After that it was a trader with a broken basket strap. Then a woman in labor who did not make it to the next village and did not need to, because there was a girl there who knew what to do with her hands. Then 2 children, lost in the cocoa, found sitting at a stranger's fire, eating boiled yam, when their father came running. And here is the thing about a crossroads. Word travels. By the 5th week, travelers were stopping deliberately. By the 7th, people from Inquantunnen itself were walking out quietly, one at a time, uswaji at dusk, for a fever leaf or a new grain basket. They did not talk about it in the village, but they came. She never charged anyone. She took what was given. Some days a yam, some days nothing. And she went to bed hungry and did the same thing again the next day. And a phrase began to move up and down that road, in the way phrases do. There is a kind girl living outside. Meanwhile, inside the walls, Kanadu was having the best season of her life. The story of the ungrateful stepdaughter had done for Kanadu what nothing else could have. She was no longer a woman with a thin harvest. She was a woman who had been robbed, who had raised another woman's child out of pure goodness and been repaid with theft, and borne it in silence for a whole season before it became too much. People brought her food. Women came to sit with her. The traders she owed grain to heard the story, and this is what she had been counting on, gave her until next harvest. And she told it better every time. That is what happens to a lie you get away with. It does not shrink. It grows and takes on detail. And after a while the person telling it can no longer find the join between the true parts and the invented ones. By the 9th week, Bodu was sent out to the shed. He stood at the edge of the clearing with his arms folded and told her she was an embarrassment, that people were talking, that she should go to the city like a normal person. Serwaa was weaving. She did not stop. "Bodu, have you eaten today?" He said of course he had. "Then you have eaten more than me," she said, "and you can walk back and tell her I am still here." He went, but not straight back. He sat down on a log at the edge of that clearing for a long time, and Ten sighed it was not right. What she did in the square? No, said Sir. It was not. And Bodu said nothing else, and got up and left. It would be a very nice story if he had done something about it. He did not. He went home and ate his supper and said nothing to anybody for 6 more weeks, and he had to live with that for the rest of his life. Then, in the 10th week, a trader from the north offered her work. real work, a cousin in the city with a weaving business, food, a bed, wages. She would have to leave in 3 days. See tweet that, because people always leave it out. Serwaa said yes, she had nothing here, and had been thrown away by everyone she had ever known. She packed her herbs and her tools into a cloth, and she was going to go. And on the morning she was meant to leave, a woman came running down the north road looking for the girl at the shed because her mother could not breathe. Serwaa went. It took 2 days. The old woman lived, and by the time she got back, the trader had gone north without her. She sat down in the doorway of that shed and cried properly, with her whole body, because she had missed it and there was not going to be another one. That was a Thursday. The festival of the Full Barns began the following Monday. They started arriving on the Sunday. Families from Adanquame and Bonsua and villages further out, carrying cloth-wrapped bundles and driving goats ahead of them. By Monday morning, Inquantanan had doubled. The square was hung with new cloth. 2 cows had been slaughtered. The drums came out of the elders. House and were tuned in the open, the sound that tells a child in that part of the country that the year has turned. For 3 days there was more food in that village than there had been all season. That is the strange and beautiful logic of a harvest festival. You spend everything you have at the exact moment you have least, on purpose, together, and through all of it, everybody was waiting for the 3rd evening. The naming of the household is the oldest part of the festival, and it is not done casually. It is done at dusk, on the final day, in front of the whole village, by the keeper of the harvest traditions. The keeper is not a chief, and does not rule anything. The keeper is the person who holds the memory, who knows what was done before anyone living was born, and who can say, "No, that is not how it is done," and be obeyed. The office is very old. It moves between the villages of the district, and the keeper's word on harvest custom cannot be overruled by any chief in the region. For the past few years, the keeper's chair had been filled by a senior elder of Inquantanan named Nana Darty. Because the actual keeper, everyone knew this, was extremely old now and not well enough to travel. Nobody expected her. So on the 3rd evening, at dusk, with the whole square packed and the light going gold, Nana Darty stood up to name the household. And he did something not strictly part of the ceremony. He talked first about what a hard year it had been, about generosity in a thin season being worth more than generosity in a fat one, and then about a woman in that village who had lost her husband and kept his farm and raised his child, and who had suffered a great wrong that year and borne it with dignity. He did not say her name. He did not have to. 300 people turned and looked at Kanadu, and a warm, approving sound went through that square. Women reached out to touch her shoulders. Somebody put a length of festival cloth into her hands. Kanadu put her hand over her mouth, and her eyes filled with tears. They were real tears, too. That is the thing about people like Kanadu. By that evening, she had told the story so many times that she was completely, genuinely moved by her own suffering. Bodu was standing behind her. He was not smiling. Nobody noticed. And out at the eastern gate, at that exact moment, Serwaa was being turned away. She had come. That was brave, and it cost her something. She had walked in at dusk in her one clean cloth, not to be seen, not to accuse anybody. She has said since that she only wanted to stand at the back and hear the drums, because she had heard them every year of her life and could not bear to sit alone in a shed, listening from a mile away. 2 men were at the gate. One she had known since she was a child. He would not look at her. He said the family had made it known she was not welcome, that it would only cause trouble, that it was better this way. And here he did look up, that he was sorry. Serwaa said, "It's all right, uncle." She could see he was ashamed, and she did not have it in her to make it worse, and she turned around and started walking back up the north road in the dark, with the drums going behind her. She was perhaps 200 paces up that road when she heard, behind her, the sound of a whole village going completely silent all at once, because someone had come in through the western gate. An old woman, very old, very thin, gray-headed, walking with a stick, alone, on foot, in a plain traveling cloth with the dust of the road still on it. No escort, no drums, no announcement. She came up the side of the square, the way an ordinary old woman comes into a crowded place, And for about 4 seconds, nobody knew what they were looking at. Then Nanadarti saw her face. And Nanadarti, 69 years old, a Señor Elde standing in front of 300 people, mid-sentence stopped talking and stood up straight. And then, in front of everybody, bowed, and every Eldar on that bench rose to their feet. Her name was Mama Essie. She had been keeper of the harvest traditions for 38 years, and her mother had been keeper before her. In that district, her word on anything to do with the harvest was final, not by force, but by something older and much harder to argue with, which is that everyone had grown up being told that it was. She had not been seen in Enquintanen in 4 years. The square did not know what to do. Half the people had never seen her, and only knew the name. The other half were already down on one knee. Somebody was frantically pulling a chair to the front. The drummers had stopped so abruptly that one drum was still ringing. Mama Essie waved the chair away and stood. "Nanadarti," she said. Her voice was thin, but it carried, because 300 people were not making a sound. "Forgive me. I am late. I am 91, and I walk slowly now." "Mother," Nanadarti's voice was not steady. "We were told you could not travel. I was told the same thing by my grandsons." Repeatedly. Somebody laughed and stopped. "But this office is not a chair to be sat in. It is a road to be walked. Since the first harvest moon, I have walked to 11 villages of this district. This is the last of them." She looked slowly around the square. Serwaa, by then, was at the back of the crowd by the eastern gate, where she had run when she heard the silence, and nobody had noticed her come in. "Now," said Mama Essie, "I am told you were about to name the household." "We were, Mother." "Then I will name it." "That is my work, and I am here to do it." She paused. "But before I do, I will tell you one story. It is short, I ask your patience." And the whole village of Enchwantanen sat down in the dust to listen. 10 weeks ago, her name was Mama Essie, was on the North Road, walking to this village. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman went very still. I was alone. That was my own foolishness. I sent my grandson back at Bonsua because and I misjudged the distance, as old people do. And by the 3rd day I had no food and no strength, and I went down in the grass at the side of the road like a bundle of rags. She said it plainly, without drama. I could not get up. I want you to understand that. I was not resting. I could not get up, and I lay there in the wet grass and thought, "Well, Essie, this is a foolish way to finish." Nobody moved, and a girl came up that road. You could feel the square change. She was 19 or 20 years old, and she looked worse than I did, and she had been crying. She knelt down in the grass beside me and called me mother and asked if I could hear her, and she had, in her hand, one small basket. Mama Essie held up her thin fingers, a hand's width apart, this big. A child's basket, with perhaps 2 handfuls of millet in the bottom of it. "And I watched her look at that basket," said Mama Essie. "And I will be honest, because it matters." She hesitated. She sat back on her heels and looked at it a long moment, and she was afraid. Anyone would be. It was everything she had. And then she made a fire and fetched water and cooked all of it, every grain, not half, not most, and fed it to me a spoon at a time, the way you must when a person has not eaten. It took her the whole morning. She sat with me while I slept. She put my stick back into my hand, and she went on her way, and never told me one word about herself, except her name. Mama Essie stopped. I have been keeper of these traditions for 38 years. I have watched a great many people be generous in front of a great many other people. That morning there was nobody on that road but the 2 of us. Nobody was watching. Nobody would ever have known. She let that sit. I have eaten at every table in this district for 4 weeks. I have not eaten a meal that cost anybody what that one cost her. And then, into a silence you could have leaned against, an old woman near the drums said, out loud, in a voice of pure horror, "Essie, God forgive us. It was the girl." Let that sit for a moment. 300 people in a harvest square with festival cloth in their hands and their mouths full, all working it out at the same time. The girl in the dust, the child's basket. 10 weeks ago, that night, this square. Look at the faces turning. one after another, toward a woman standing near the front with a length of honor cloth in her hands and tears still on her cheeks. Look at Kanadu right now, in the last few seconds before she understands what has just walked into this village. And look at the back of the crowd, by the eastern gate, where a thin girl in one clean cloth is standing very still with both hands over her mouth. A girl who was turned away at that gate 20 minutes ago, and who has just heard the oldest woman in the district tell 300 people that she is the most generous person in it. Kanadu moved first. She was quick across the front of that square, almost before people had finished turning, down on both knees in front of Mama Essie, with her hands open and her face pure grief. "Mother, thank God you have come. That is my daughter." Somebody in the crowd made a sound. "That is my daughter you fed," said Kanadu, and her voice broke beautifully. "My husband's child. I raised her from 6 years old. She has been living wild out there since the trouble, and I have not slept one night." "Stand up," said Mama Essie. Kanadu kept talking. "Stand up." It was not loud. It did not have to be. Kanadu came up off her knees. "You have not asked me her name," said Mama Essie. Kanadu opened her mouth. "A woman who has not slept in 10 weeks, sighed Mama Essie, asks the name. Before anything, thank God, before I raised her, she asks, 'What was her name, Mother?' Was it Serwaa?" The old woman's dark eyes did not move. "You did not ask. You made a speech." The silence in that square was becoming something physical. "Now," said Mama Essie, and she turned away from Kanadu entirely to the village. "I have one question, and then I will name the household, and then I will sit down, because I am 91 years old, and I have walked 11 villages. Here is the question. Which house deserves the harvest, the one that stored the most grain, or the one that shared its last handful?" Nobody answered. She waited. She was very good at waiting. She had been doing it for 91 years. The silence went on until it was unbearable, and then a little longer, and then a woman stood up at the third table. Her name was Abrafi. She was about 50, and she sold cloth and what she did. Next was the bravest thing anyone did in that square that day. I saw it. Her voice shook so badly she had to stop and start again. I saw her thrown out. 10 weeks ago, on the first night, in Tis Square, she took her by the arm and put her down in the dust in front of all of us and threw a basket at her and told her it was more than she deserved. Abrafi was crying now. And I said nothing. I was sitting right there with my mouth full of her food, and I said nothing. Then a man stood up. I saw it. Then another, across the square. And then it was not one at a time anymore. It went through that crowd like water through a broken bank. 20, 40, 60 people, standing all over the square, saying it out loud, some angry, most ashamed. An old man stood and said, "I have known that child since she was born, and I let it happen, and had to be helped back down." Kanadu was still at the front, holding the honor cloth, and then it came apart, all at once, and from every direction. A woman said the girl could not have been stealing grain, because she had bought a basket from her at the shed, and there had been no food in the girl's own pot. A man said his brother-in-law was one of the traders Kanadu had sold grain to in advance, 3 years running, and was owed for 2 seasons. The gatekeeper, the man who had turned Serwaa away 20 minutes earlier, pushed forward and said he had been told to keep her out of the festival, and named who had told him. And Bodu, standing behind his mother, said in a voice that carried further than he meant it to, "She never took anything." Kanadu turned and looked at her son. "She never took anything." He sighed again louder, crying, 22 years old, 6 weeks too late, and saying it anyway. There was no grain missing. There was never any grain missing. She did all the work. Every year. "Mother, I have not put my hand to that field in 4 years, and you know it, Bodu. I went out there in the 9th week to tell her to go away. She had not eaten that day, and she asked me if I had eaten." He wiped his face with his arm, and I came home and said nothing. "I have been sitting in this square all evening, letting them give you cloth." Kanadu did not answer him. She stood in the middle of that square, in front of 300 people, and could not find one single thing to say, and that was the moment everybody understood, completely, all at once. And then Mama Essie said quietly, "There is one more thing, and I would rather not say it, but I will, because I think this village needs the whole of it." She turned to Kanadu. "You do not remember me." Kanadu stared at her. "You have looked at me for 5 minutes, and there is nothing in your face. I thought perhaps you were hiding it. You are not. You truly do not remember." "Mother, I have never." The morning of that same day, the day of the first feast. Before I went down on that road, I came to this village. I had been walking 2 days with nothing. I came in by the eastern gate and went to the largest compound on that side, because a hungry old woman goes to the house that looks like it can spare something. "I stood at your gate," said Mama Essie, "and I asked you for food." Kanadu's face had gone gray. "You did not shout at me. You were not cruel. That is what I want this village to hear, because afterwards you will tell yourselves this was a wicked woman. And I want you to understand that it is worse than that." Mama Essie's voice was perfectly level. "You told me the harvest was thin and there was nothing to spare, and you were sorry, and you went back inside. It took 9 seconds. You did not think about it again for 1 minute of your life, and that evening you carried 11 baskets of food into this square for the feast. Nobody in Inquantanan moved, so I walked out of the north gate and went up the road and went down in the grass. And I lay there, and that night your daughter slept against the outside of that wall, and in the morning she came up that same road and found me. 2 people from one house," said Mama Essie, "on one day. One had a full granary and no room in it. The other had 2 handfuls of millet, and no house at all." She turned back to the village. "Now," she said, "I will ask you again. Which house deserves the harvest?" They found Serwaa at the back of the crowd by the eastern gate. She had not moved, and had not said one word through any of it. When people began to turn and look for her, she tried to step backwards into the dark, and a young man she barely knew put his hand out and said, "No, no, sister, please." And the crowd opened in front of her all the way to the front of the square, and she had to walk it. She said afterwards she remembers almost none of it, except that her legs were shaking, and that somewhere in the middle a woman said, "God bless you," and pressed a hand against her back. Mama Essie watched her come. When Serwaa reached the front, the old woman took both of the girls' hard, cracked hands into her own. "You did not tell me," she said. "Tell you what, mother?" "Anything." Mama Essie almost smiled. "You gave me everything you had, and you told me your name. Nothing else. Not one word about that square, or that woman, or what had been done to you the night before. I have thought about that for 10 weeks. You could have told me. I would have listened." Serwaa did not know what to say, so she said the true thing. "You were hungry." "Mother," it was not the time to talk about myself. And the oldest woman in that district put her forehead briefly against the back of the girl's hand. Then she straightened up and turned to the village and did her work. Kanadu of Inquantanan was not beaten. She was not driven out. Mama Essie was very clear about that, and about why. "I have watched villages destroy a person," she said. "It is quick, and it feels wonderful, and by the next harvest you have all agreed to forget it happened, and nothing has changed. I am not going to give you that." Instead, she took away the only thing Kanadu had ever actually wanted. "The honor of leading this festival is not yours, and will not be yours, and will not be your household's while you live. Sighed Mama Essie, "You will not carry the first basket. You will not stand at the front. Every year, for the rest of your life, you will stand in this square on this evening and watch somebody else do it, and you will know exactly why. And so will everybody standing beside you. She let that land. The grain you owe, you will repay. The elders will set terms, and they will be hard. But they will not ruin you, because your son has done nothing, and I am not interested in punishing him for having a coward's tongue and an honest heart." Bodu made a small sound. "And the land you have farmed for 7 years is not yours. It is Nierko's. It goes to Nierko's blood today, in front of witnesses." Then she turned and named the household. "I do not need to tell you which one. Here is the part that actually matters, the part that made this a story still told. Serwaa did not throw Kanadu out of the house. Everyone expected it. It would have been just. The land was hers. The compound was hers, and not one person in that village would have raised a word against her. She let her stay, 2 of the 3 rooms and the yard. For as long as she lived, she said 1 sentence about it at the time and never discussed it again. I know what the outside of that gate is like. And when the elders came the following month to arrange the procession, Serwaa asked to change the beginning of the festival. "The first table," she said. "Before anybody eats." Not the elders. Not the households. Not me. The strangers first, anybody on the road that day. The widows, the children with nobody. They eat first, and they eat properly, and then the rest of us. There was some argument. There always is. It was not how it had been done. Mama Essie settled it in 1 sentence, from her chair, without opening her eyes. It is how it will be done. Led that festival for 51 years. She married, late, a quiet man from Bonzua, who had first come to that shed with a broken basket. She had 4 children, and taught every one of them to weave. She never became rich. She gave away far too much for that to have been possible. Kanadu lived another 9 years in those 2 rooms. It was not a warm household, but it was not a cruel one. She never apologized, not once, not really, and Serwaa never asked her to. On the 3rd evening of every festival, she stood in that square and watched. Nobody ever made her come. Bodu left in the spring, started his palm wine trade in the end, did quite well at it, and came back for the festival every year until he was an old man. He told the story to his own children, all of it, including his own part, and he did not make himself sound better than he was. Mama Essie died 2 years later, at 93, in her own bed, fussed over by her grandsons exactly as she had feared, and the basket Serwaa kept, that little child's basket, 2 handfuls, the one that was thrown at her feet in the dust, and when she led her first procession, she set it down on the ground beside the first table, empty, and left it there through the whole feast. Somebody asked her why. She said, "So that we do not forget what it can do." They have put an empty basket beside the first table every year since. Nobody in Ninquantanan today can tell you the name of the woman who threw it. That is simply gone, the way those names go. But every child in that village can tell you what the basket means, and every one of them has been told, at some point, standing at the edge of a harvest square with a full stomach, that the smallest thing you own, given away when you have nothing, can feed a whole village's heart. For the elders of Ninquantanan tell their children, to this very day, a saying that was born in that square, that a full granary feeds a household, but an open hand feeds a village. The full granary is loud. It is easy to see and easy to praise, and everybody knows whose it is. The open hand is quiet. It gives when nobody is counting, on a road where nobody is watching, and it very often gives the last thing it has. And this is why the ancestors are not impressed by the size of what a person gives, only by the size of what it costs them. A rich man's basket is a gift. A hungry girl's basket is a whole life. And when the harvest is finally weighed, it will not be weighed in grain. For kindness done in the open square, where everyone can see it, is only half a kindness. The other half has already been paid back to you in the looking. But the kindness you do on an empty road at dawn, to a stranger who cannot help you and will never be able to repay you, goes into a different account altogether. It waits, sometimes 10 weeks, sometimes 10 years. And it is astonishing, when it comes back, how much of it there turns out to be. If Serwaa's story moved you, if you believe that what you give when you have nothing counts for more than what you give when you have plenty, then do something for me now. Type the word basket in the comments, so I know this story reached you. Share it with someone who has been giving quietly for a long time and thinks nobody has noticed. Subscribe to our family if you have not yet, so you never miss a story. And I will see you in the next one.